today. Which is the word is proof.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's cool in a way.
Okay.
Do you have any?
You want one?
Yeah.
What do you want?
Yeah,
Good?
that's good.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming to Toronto.
We're happy to be here.
Yeah. Okay. You were both in Ottawa this week.
Yes.
You held a press conference. I watched it. There was no one there.
No one there.
How do you explain that?
The media is more interested right now on what's going on inside Canada, inside the United States, and when there's still a genocide going on still in Palestine, it seems to not interest as much when there are internal things.
So when you were talking there yesterday, and there was no one in the room, just give me a sense of what that felt like.
We conveyed our message, and we hoped it's gonna, maybe some journalist is gonna appear. No one came, but thankfully we have social media as a strong tool, and it just reminded us how important it is to have the independent media, independent social media tools that we have when the mainstream media doesn't do its job.
So both of you have refused to serve in the Israeli army. You've gone to prison over it. Einat 87 days,
Yes.
Is that right? 87. Tal 185 days.
Correct.
Let's start with you. What happened that made you decide, I'm not going to serve in the Israeli army?
So it was a long path, because growing up it was very clear that once you finish high school, you go to the military. That's how life works as an Israeli Jew. And the military was a very big part of my life, like as all of us, like nothing special. I have a grandpa who fought in the 67 war, the 73 war, and I thought I'm just gonna be like in an educational unit, finish with those 2 years and continue on with my life. But
So no combat. You thought I'm just going to
no,
go.
I was never...
Can you choose? Is that an option?
For women, yes. For women, you volunteer to be a combat. Men can't. They have less choice.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I grew up, and I think a turning point was when I came out of the closet after for a few years feeling very different from the other girls, and I didn't have a name for it. And once I did have that name for it, and I started to find community and learning about the history and the ones who came before me, who thanks to them I have the rights that I have today. That's what made me want to also be part of the struggle and fight for the rights that we still don't have yet, and for my trans friends. And that's, I think, when I also understood that my voice matters and can make a change.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you at that point?
I was around 15, 16.
Okay.
And then at 17, I joined the climate movement, one of the climate movements. And there, for the first time, I had Palestinian friends. And
So let me get this straight.
yes.
You lived in Israel for
Yes.
17 years of your life.
Yes.
You never had a Palestinian friend.
I didn't know, not a real friendship, no.
Yeah. How much does the community sort of mix? I mean, how much exposure would you have even had to a Palestinian?
First of all, they're not called Palestinians, they're called Israeli Arabs.
Okay.
Even them identifying as Palestinians, but they have Israeli citizenship. They're inside the 48 borders. They're not from the West Bank. It took me that's also something that can seem confusing, taking how we grow up in. We live in very separated societies. Even in Tel Aviv, which is near Jaffa, it's very, very separated, and you don't have a lot of deep connection. Like, you go to eat hummus on a Saturday. That's the connection you have with Palestinians. Or you hear about them on the news as terrorists.
Yeah.
So that friendship really changed everything for me, because I was already beginning to be involved in activism, but having that friendship and starting to hear stories from my friends of what their families are going through, and that the stories from their grandparents are not the stories that I heard from my grandparents, and hearing the word Nakba for the first time. And for the first time, the occupation, this word occupation that I saw in the news sometimes, I read in Haaretz, it didn't have a lot of it didn't really grasp what it meant. But then having these faces and these stories behind this occupation, this big word, that's when I realized that we live in the same place and in completely different realities, and that I will not serve the military that oppresses my friends.
How about for you, Tal? When did you sort of come to that realization that you don't want to be a part of this?
The most influential figure on my politicization is definitely, I have to say, my father.
Okay.
He was a journalist, and I remember him always going to interview Israeli members of parliament, to interview Palestinian militants, to cover attacks that happened in our city. And it was always a very hot subject in our house. And I, as a young kid, was a little bit of a math nerd. I'm still a nerd, but I think in my early to late middle school years, I kind of took after him in getting interested in politics and reading a lot about what's happening around us.
Was he giving you the books, or did you go out sort of seeking them yourself?
I went out, and then I went and told him, look at this and this and this and this. Have you heard of this and this? And he's like, yeah. It was a very good bond, because before I was, I don't know, not as much interested in those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And around age 14, 15, around the COVID years, he fell sick with cancer.
I'm so sorry.
And after a long fight, we tried all the treatments and all the doctors and medication, and in the end he passed away.
Mm.
And that was a hard point in our family's life, leaving my mom with me and my two siblings alone. And I know that after he passed away, I know that he lives on in what I do and in how I continue his legacy as this politicizing figure in my life. And a couple months after his passing away, I'm still young, I'm still 16, I haven't really thought about the military in that way. I knew that ideologically I did not want to go to combat, but I thought maybe intelligence could be a good trampoline into civilian life, because this is how they offer it to you. I saw this story on B'Tselem, a human rights organization, about a baby from Gaza. She was born, and a couple months after she was diagnosed with a disease that if she was born here or in Israel, she would have had to go to the hospital, maybe get a few treatments, and continue with her life. But because she was born in Gaza, the doctor she had to go to was in East Jerusalem. And the parents applied for a permit and got delayed and delayed and denied and delayed again. And in the end, at the age of 7 months, Fatima passed away. And that story really struck me, because this was still, you have to understand, I was still very much in grief
Yes,
about
you're
my
still
father.
mourning. Yeah.
And it made me realize that how much privilege me and my family have, although having gone through this grief, we don't have to live with the question of what if. We know that we tried all the options, and this is what nature wanted. And this parents of Fatima will have to live the rest of their lives with what would have happened if we were born on the other side of the line, what would have happened if we were born on the other side of the sea. And that's when I realized that no matter what part of the military, no matter what part of the system, if it's being in combat, flying the plane, being in intelligence, it's all part of the system that is built on the oppression of the Palestinian people, and that I cannot join it.
What do you think your dad would think about what you're doing now?
I know that he would be proud. I think about him a lot, and I meet a lot of his friends and colleagues, and they're all very happy with what I'm doing, and they all tell me how much he would have been proud of my actions.
I want to come to the actual process of refusal, because not many of us know what that machinery is. How do you sort of go about telling them, you know what, I don't want to do this? Like I'm assuming there is some sort of mechanism by which you have to follow. So what do you do?
So you start getting orders to come to the enlistment base at 16, at 11th grade, to come do these different kinds of tests during high school.
So while you're in high school,
Yes.
you get ordered to come and do tests. Like, are they psychological? Like, what kind of tests?
Different kinds of tests to check for which role you're most suitable for. because they would
Physical and
physical,
psychological.
Yeah.
all kinds of different kinds of tests, and then so this is all preparation of like 2 years that they can summon you for whatever test they want, and then you enlist after you finish high school. That's how it works. And for me, after I finished high school, I did a voluntary year, and during that year, I appealed to see a conscientious committee. And this conscientious committee did not recognize me as a conscientious objector, and that's why on my enlistment day, I came to the enlistment base, refused, and was imprisoned.
So, why wouldn't they recognize you as a conscientious objector? Did they have a reason?
So the conscientious committee, the Israeli conscientious committee, violates the international standards of recognizing conscientious objectors. The international standards state that it's supposed to be a civil committee. It's not supposed to be part of the military. It's supposed to recognize conscientious objectors who their conscientious doesn't allow them to serve a specific war or the whole military or any
So if
military,
you're religious, for instance, would that be a good reason?
There is not for the conscientious committee, but there is this status quo since the country was founded between most of the ultra-Orthodox communities and the government and the military, that they are exempted. It's called that they serve in their
Another way.
in their
Yeshivas.
in their yeshivas.
Yeah.
And so that's most of the ultra-Orthodox. They do have their exemptions. And for me, coming to the conscientious committee, they expected me to show this broad, unrealistic pacifism, asking questions about would I fight the Nazis if I was in Britain in the 40s? How would I act in situations of sexual violence, expecting me to give this unrealistic
I would be a
pacifist
pacifist
kind of
if I was
thing.
being violated.
It's a very, very harsh, a very terrible experience. Like I came out crying from that committee. It's terrible sitting in a room in front of a bunch of military
And you're a teenager.
generals. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, a teenager in front of a bunch of military generals. A lawyer can't come into that committee. It's not a court. So our legal advisor in Misalvot Network, where we come from, she prepared us, but she can't come in the room with me.
Although it very much feels like a court.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yes. So this committee didn't recognize me as a conscientious objector for the first time. And then I refused. Me and 3 other guys had similar enlistment days. We refused together. We did a very big public campaign. We were on the media. There were solidarity protests. This was in September 2022, before October 7th.
So you did it before October 7th,
Yes.
2023.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you did it after. You were the first conscientious objector after October
First
7th.
public, yes.
Public one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good distinction. And we'll talk about that later. You were the first public conscientious objector. So what was that experience like for you? Was it similar to what Einat went through?
Part of the reasons why I even knew what refusal is, or that's even an option to do it publicly with a campaign, is because seeing Einat on national media.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it definitely was a point where before October 7th, I knew that there was this uncertainty with refusal, where I didn't know how long I'm going to sit for, how much the army is going to target me personally, how much they're going to make an example out of me. And then when October 7th happened and the whole country went into this state of like grief and then very fast into the state of revenge, where any voice of dissent was being very harshly silenced, it was a debate. I was scared, as a lot of people were scared, to speak out against the motives of the war. But in the end, after talking to Einat, talking to other past refusers, I realized that it's not only the right decision, it's the decision that it is my responsibility, because of the privilege, because of where I come from, the supportive background, the supportive friend group that I have. It is my responsibility to speak out for some people may have wanted to refuse publicly, but they can't afford it. They can't afford the ostracization from their family, from their community. And I felt that it was my responsibility to speak out. And after that, I was targeted by the military, targeted by the head of the enlistment center, who gave out a direct order not to release me.
Oh.
And
So that you can't speak to people
well,
about
not
your
to
experience, or
No, but not to exempt him.
not to give me
I
an exemption, because we
see.
go back again and again and again.
Yes.
And at some point, it was very clear that there was some kind of something that, because usually conscientious objectors get exemptions after 100, 120 days, and I was already sitting for 180 days, 185 days before I got my exemption. After the fact, I realized from a source from within that there was a direct order from up not to give me an exemption.
So how are you to classify it by the state right now? What's the term used for you?
We're exempted from the military. We didn't sit in a civil prison, so we don't have any criminal record.
Okay.
I got my conscientious exemption after seeing another committee after 87 days. He got his mental health exemption. We're just exempted from the military, like many.
Indefinitely
other-
now. You
yeah,
don't have to go through this process, or you don't know?
Right now, it's indefinitely, but with the pace of the fascism in Israel, we don't know if things are gonna change. But right now, yes.
So what did you know? If I could start with you, what did you know about the prison before you went in, before you got there?
So I spoke a lot to past refusers who shared with me their experience, and I wanted to know every detail, from what time you wake up in the morning and how does the schedule look like, and what am I allowed to bring in, and what they're going to confiscate, and how can I have like better conditions, like if you work in doing laundry or work in the lunchroom, then you have better conditions and all that kind of stuff. So really knowing, because I wanted my time to be as less sufferable as it can. So, but nothing can really prepare you to sit in the military prison. Here, I would like to stop and say that it's not the military prisons that we hear about that Palestinians sit in. They sit in horrific, unhuman conditions, facing torture. And that's not the prison that we sat in. We did have tough, like it was tough at times, not comparable to what Palestinians face.
You're not in a situation like Sidi Timan or
No,
for
no,
a prison or
you
anything
can't
like
do
that.
No, no.
So tell me, Tal, what was a typical day like for you in prison? What time are you up?
Well, you wake up at 6 with the sound of the megaphone of the loudspeaker. Good morning, good morning. You have 5 minutes to get up and sit on your beds, and then after those 5 minutes, you have 15 more minutes to pack up all your sheets, pack up everything that's on your bed into bags, because you're not allowed to have sheets on your bed during the day. It's like making so there's no sense of permanency inside the prison. After that, getting counted in the morning, going to breakfast, or not before breakfast, of course, we have to raise the flag.
So you raise the flag.
Well,
you go outside,
you
and
go
what's
outside, you stand in like rows of 4, and
you sing the anthem or
no,
something?
No.
No.
Sometimes, but usually they pick someone out. They ask, is there anyone volunteering? And then they say, oh, everyone has to volunteer. There's no one that doesn't volunteer. And then everyone has to raise their hand, and then they pick someone to raise the flag. And only after that you go into breakfast, you eat breakfast, and you go out. Maybe you have a phone call to your family 7 minutes a day.
7 minutes a day.
That's
the basic, but if you work somewhere in the prison, then you get more minutes.
If you work in the kitchen, then you may get 15 minutes. If you have really good contact with the guards, you could get 20 minutes.
That's a lot of minutes.
Anyway, so you go back and you rest in your cell. Then when it comes lunchtime, you get counted in your cell again. You go eat lunch. Same thing. You go back to your cell. Nothing really happens until dinner. Then you go to sleep.
I have to tell you, please don't mistake my smiling for at all making light of what you went through. In the back of my mind, I just keep hearing people say Israel is a democracy, and it makes me smile. I'll come back to that because I want to ask you about that. You told a story to The Guardian about your first morning prison, and you reading a quote, and I have the quote here, I just want to read it, that you read on a blackboard. I'm not sure if this was in a class or what it was.
Plaque of a quote.
So it was framed.
Yes,
even.
it's permanent
okay.
there.
I'm going to read the quote. It says, "Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world." And what was the name of that? Who said that quotation?
That was a quote by by Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela. So you're sitting in a prison in Israel for not wanting to serve the army, and Israel has a plaque with Nelson Mandela's quote on the wall. What goes through your mind?
First of all, I laugh because that's like insane. It's wow. It's good that they recognize the faults of the apartheid system that was very close to actually the apartheid South Africa was good friends with Israel. Anyway, so I have all these things to say to my fellow inmates, to maybe the guards, but I realize that nothing will really pass in the way, so I just laugh and think to myself that, oh, okay, I have no one to tell this to now for a month until I get out, and then I can tell it to someone. So I write it down, maybe tell my lawyer on the phone, but...
Who were the other people with you in the prison? Like, were there other refuseniks? What was your relationship with the other inmates?
So when I was sitting in prison, like I said, 3 other guys refused with me, Navev, Yatar, and Shachar, and they were sitting in the men's prison, sometimes together, sometimes not together. I was in the women's prison. I was the only refuser. The rest were or deserters.
Deserters. Who are they? Like, what do? They
it's
just
women who
take off.
Take off, and when you get to know them, you understand that it's not. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a result of them being oppressed by the system their whole lives, and most of them have gone through very tough situations in their lives. Some of them come from really low social economic classes. Some experience different kinds of violence throughout their life or different kinds of trauma, and it's just that the system is oppressing them and discriminating their whole life, and this is just another point where it happens in more extreme, and that is, I think it shows a lot about our society. We also have ones who were caught smoking weed on base, very, very big crimes. But that's the women's prison, and it's pretty small. It's between 20 to 40 women, depending on the day. The men's prison is hundreds of people, and there you have the whole range of crimes, from the ones, the very severe crimes of smoking weed or deserting the military, like I said, to actual crimes of committing acts of sexual violence.
So you were in a prison with like hardened criminals.
I wouldn't say hardened criminals. They divided into people based on how dangerous they claim to be, like how.
Okay, so you're not mixing with other.
Well, in the beginning, I wasn't mixing with them, but then because I was there for the second, for the third, for the fourth time, my danger level went up every time, because they see me as more dangerous if it's my third time there than if it's my first time there. So by my fifth time, I was already sitting in the.
You were the hardened criminal.
Supposedly, but also in the most hardened part of the prison. Most people are super nice, and there are only a couple that seem like they have their little gang around them. But except for that, it was people were nice, not as nice when they heard about my political opinions.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. What were their responses to you knowing that you were a refusnik?
Sometimes I had to do it strategically, because if I come in as like a new guy and say, look, I'm a refuser to the occupation, to the Nakba, to all of this, I would get shunned and probably no one would talk to me.
Not that you would ever say the word Nakba in military prison.
Right, but by forming these personal connections with people, by being in them with the cell, laughing about the guards, or making absurdist jokes about the situation we're all in together, creating this personal bond, sometimes I found myself comfortable telling people why I'm there and what my opinions are, and actually forming some really close connections with people, and them telling me, you're the first leftist I've ever met, and we say achla gever in Hebrew. It means,
what does that mean?
It means a good man, but it's sexist, but
it's a very machoistic kind of
thing. It's a machoistic way of saying that you're a nice guy. So I took the compliment, but now all these people who hate leftists so deep in their heart, and they've never met one, now they go back to their friends in the periphery, and they talk about leftists maybe while they're sitting in a bar, and one says, oh, how much he hates leftists, but then the guy that I sat in the cell with might say, yeah, I hate leftists too, but there is this one guy.
Yeah.
There's this one guy.
They're not all bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that really shows the strength of dehumanizing, of humanizing, sorry.
Yeah.
Of humanizing when there's so much dehumanization around us.
I mean, it goes back also to your story of not having once you got a Palestinian friend, you understood what the system was that was subjugating them. I want to talk a little bit about the legal consequences of not serving. We already know what that is. You went to prison, but you've served in a way. You sometimes go into a larger prison of the society that really is not on board with what you're doing. What are some of the personal consequences that you've suffered with your refusal to serve? I mean, you have a family. You both have probably families who are supportive. But what did your friend circle look like after?
Today, I think most of my friends are from our activist circles.
Uh-huh.
I think naturally you drift apart because when I finished my voluntary year and I was sitting in prison. The people that I did the voluntary year with were in the military, and it's the complete opposites of the coin, and you drift apart, especially after October 7th. I was a refuser on the streets, protesting the genocide, going to the West Bank, and they are in Gaza or on their computers in the intelligence unit doing I don't want to know what. So that it really drifts you apart, and from some people I drifted apart, some people drifted apart from me. It can be very isolating, but I'm very thankful that we have like the Misavot community and the activist community. It is strong. It's small, but it's very, very strong, and it gives you a strong sense of belonging.
And for people who don't know, when you're saying Masavot, can you just talk about that organization a little bit? Who are they? What do they do?
Misarvot is, it means refusers in the feminine conjugation of the word. It is a network that supports Israeli conscientious objectors to the draft, also by legal support, offering them the crucial legal support that is so needed when you refuse to serve, the legal back, and also a social circle of like-minded people, because it's so important. There's some people that we've met in the network that come from hard backgrounds, that their family is not very supportive, and it's so important. I see that it's so important for them to meet people that think like them and to have the support of people their age, but also of past refusers, of people that refused now, maybe in the 2010s, in the 2000s, even 1970s, to see that there are other people like them.
Mm-hmm. And it gives you a sense of this, so there's a history that you can go back to.
Yeah, there definitely is.
I want to ask you, Einat, because there are, as a queer person, you were talking about coming out and how that sort of impacted you. I want to know, there was this point very early on in the first month or so where I remember an Israeli soldier putting the pride flag on the tank in Gaza. When you saw that, what went through your mind?
It broke my heart. It just broke my heart. It's so devastating. Like how can you put a pride flag that is supposed to be a symbol of a struggle for liberation and for equal rights on the ruins of a home where people lived in, and maybe there were bodies on that flag? It really breaks my heart, because I think one of the biggest motives and one of the biggest, like, deepest places that I act from is my own personal experience of being different, and fighting for fighting alongside those who also are oppressed in different kinds of ways. And I want to wish that, like, as queer people, we have that we use this perspective of seeing social injustices and seeing discrimination for the better, and for fighting for liberation and for human rights for everyone, not just for our community. And
Israel would say that we are the gay-friendly place. We've heard this all the time. If I hear it all the time as a queer journalist, if you were there, they'd throw you off a rooftop. How does it feel to have your sexuality weaponized in that way against you? I mean, does anybody say to you, how can you fight for them? They would kill you if you were over there.
No, of course. And also, I think going back to the experience in prison, there was no homophobia or any kind of queerphobia in the women's prison, in the women's department.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of racism, but no queerphobia. And I remember this incident that this girl said something borderline homophobic. Everyone was against her, and there was like a whole mess, and like told her she was not okay. But many of them were very racist, and I remember them honestly asking me, how can I support the Palestinian struggle as a queer person? And I think it's a question it's very interesting to talk about, because that's that intersectionality that the systems that oppress us, the state, they don't want us to make that connection. They do everything to make sure that we don't make that connection, that we don't make those connections between the struggles, because we're stronger together. And it's easier to divide, like it's easier to divide us into different groups and make us think like we don't have anything in common.
Easier to control too,
yes,
right? When people are divided in that way. You spent nearly 4 months in prison, even
6 months.
6 months, wow. And you were going in and out, right? And you did so while you were both teens. Sorry, it just blows my mind. What has that experience taught you? Because this is the age where you're really forming, right? What has it taught you? The fact that you went to prison for this.
Well, first of all, it was the best decision I've made. Not taking part, knowing that now forever I can say that I was not part of the military that committed this horrible genocide. This is the best decision that I've made. And also, although the experience in prison was hard, I feel like it is something important that I went through. And it gave me a broader understanding of Israeli society. I met people there inside that I would never have met in my day-to-day life in Tel Aviv. Learning about the cultures of sects of our society that we don't hear about, like Ethiopian Jews, about the Druze citizens of Israel, about the Bedouins, all kinds of people that are very overrepresented in the prison population, but that I've never even had any conversation with outside of prison.
So it was a weird form of education for you, like a school.
Well,
almost.
I think so. I learned a lot about how people feel. Like, for example, that Ethiopian Jews and all these people that come from lower socioeconomic classes, we have a very big bonding on not liking the police, and I could connect with them on that level all the time. And with the Druze people, I tried to talk Arabic, and it was an experience to learn how to get around in the broader Israeli society, not just in my bubble of Tel Aviv.
I think I learned I think many of the connections were on a very basic human level, basic but deep, like human level of experiences that we went through. And I think it was a very important lesson in being in like having these conversations that you can talk politics. Well, politics is our lives, and talking about not using the big words, all the isms, and even the word occupation that is a controversial word in Israeli society. When I want to create this connection with this girl that she might be very right-wing, I'm not going to say apartheid regime. I'm going to share the stories of Palestinian families that I know in Masafiriyata in the West Bank. I'm going to share about this family that I know that their house was demolished many, many times. These kids that I know that were attacked by settlers on the way to school. And I would ask her, how would you feel in that situation? Or when... Or maybe debunking this narrative that the violence comes only from the Palestinians, and sharing that I experienced settler violence by myself. I saw it in my eyes. I was there. And sharing those experiences and not talking in these big ideas is I think, a big lesson that I learned.
I want to talk about the role of the Israeli army, the role that it plays in your society, right? Because I think that here in the West, we don't really understand. Our army here in Canada, for instance, is very hidden from us. We don't see it even. I don't even know where their bases are. I don't even know what they do on a day-to-day basis. But that's not the case in Israel, I've been told by other people that I've interviewed. What role does it play in the formation of your identity as an Israeli?
The army and the society, you can't take them apart. It's one and the same. Just like here in Canada, I've heard after you finish high school, it makes sense that that's the next step is college.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in middle class families, that's always what happens. This is exactly the same with the army. It's not seen as this like moral decision. It's seen as just something that has to be done, and that we're going to do it, and that we can use it either for kind of a whole range of uses, where you can go to combat, or you can go to military journalism. That's also a sect in the military, where if you want to become a journalist, that's where you want to get into. It's all these kinds of fields that either you do it for sacrifice for the nation, or you do it for trampoline into civilian life.
You know, I'm originally from Iran, and women don't get conscripted there. But if you're a man, you have to serve your 2 years or whatever it is, and you can't get a job if you don't serve that time. And I just find it really interesting that the similarities between the two countries, even though my country is quote unquote not a democracy, but yours apparently is. Can you talk to me a little bit about what some of your very early memories are of the army as a kid? So what are you sort of in school? Do they come and see you? What memories do you have of the army?
I think the basic memory of walking in the street and seeing soldiers, that's something that maybe it's worth sharing, because I don't think that it's part of the Canadian experience.
It's not.
Sometimes we forget even to mention it because it's such a big, it's just a given part of our lives.
So there's just soldiers.
There's soldiers on uniform with their weapons, all sizes of weapons, just walking in the street and sitting with you on a train, and the trains can be very crowded sometimes. And I remember as a kid I was scared of those of the guns. It's a part of your life, and you know that, like, and everyone has an older cousin or older sibling that is in the military, or a dad that's doing time in reserve. And the politicians many of them came from the military. Military generals are very respected. It's
just a very militarized society.
It's a very militarized society. It's part of your life.
Because now I've even seen images of women wearing bikinis with an automatic rifle on the beach.
Yeah, of course. When you go to the beach, you can see people with their, because they need to have it, some of them need to have it with them all the time. So they're with their bathing suits, and they have their, their automatic guns.
She doesn't even know her names of guns. She's so pacifist.
Me, I'm like M16.
Oh yeah, those kinds of stuff.
I think there are a couple memories. I remember in first or second grade, one of our teachers went to reserve, and
what does that mean, reserve?
Well, after you finished military service, at least back then, I think men had to stay in reserves until their 40s or 50s, depending on
the unit you served.
Depending on the unit, every 2 years, you get called back for a month or two for training.
So you're always ready.
You're always ready.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking and hearing that and thinking like, wow, if you go to the military, then basically, like until you're 50, you're not really free. And I think it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to say that. Never mind.
You can say it. Come on.
I'll tell you after.
We'll turn off the mics after, and
yes,
you can tell.
I'll write that down. Anyway,
Remind
and another memory is in first grade, during one of the many assaults on Gaza. I don't remember what year, but there was an activity in school to write letters to soldiers that are currently fighting. And one of the parents in my class...
So you're 6 years old in first
6 years
grade,
old.
yeah.
One of the parents in my class who I came to know as another leftist activist wrote to the principal or to the teacher that this is unacceptable and that we shouldn't be doing this. And I now learned only in the past year or two that my parents were also part of that.
That objection.
That objection. And I think we ended up not doing that. But all these things that happened in like the background where, think about a class of 40 kids. First of all, it's a huge class. None of the parents had any objection to that except for my parents and another couple. To 6-year-olds writing letters to soldiers that are committing horrible crimes.
I think that's a good segue into sort of asking you both about this fringe element, right? Because, I mean, as we said, no one came to your press conference in Ottawa. And the idea, and I've spoken to other colleagues, they always say to me, well, they're not really representative of the majority of what people think. What do you think about that? What do you think about that?
I think that the conscientious objector voice is a very important voice in our society. And I think that it's a voice that I'm proud that I'm one of that voices, but that it's a voice that we should have in society, and it's a problem if we don't have that voice. And I think that the media doesn't only cover what happens in the mainstream, isn't supposed to only cover what happens in the mainstream, and the media has no problem in covering the fringe of the right wing. And I think that's maybe something to notice. I know more about the Israeli media than the Canadian media, but in the Israeli media, the right wing, that some of them are also, you could say that they are fringe. Unfortunately, as time goes by, they're less and less fringe and they're more mainstream. But having them on mainstream TV all the time, the media has no problem to do that. So I think when saying that that we're the fringe, we should think of what kind of fringe are we.
What about you? I know we were speaking before. You mentioned Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. I mean, they used to be considered fringe. Our media doesn't cover them the way they should, but I know that your media does in Israel.
In the era of the many, many elections that I'm sure you've heard about in the 2019-2020, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who just a couple years before was seen as this fringe member of Knesset. He used to have a picture of mass murderer Baruch Goldstein in his living room, speaking about him as a hero, was now getting regular media interviews, not only in the fringe right-wing media, but in the mainstream media. Obviously, he was debating with people, but he came with a very populist view. He was very ready for this kind of representation, and right now he's standing with more support than he's had now he's losing support, but after all these media interviews, he became a leg in the government that Netanyahu has to please at all times. And this is part of the reason why why the hostage deal is so hard to achieve. Because a vast majority of Israelis have wanted a hostage deal and an end of the war for the past year, according to polls. Itamar Ben-Gvir and his party and Bezalel Smotrich and his party are both strong opponents to the hostage deal, and they represent a small percentage of the Israeli society.
It's interesting also because in your society, you do get quite a lot of coverage. I have seen you getting quite a lot of footage. I mean, a friend of yours, you told me he's a friend. Itamar Greenberg was just released, and he spent 197 days in prison. Have you spoken to him?
Yes, we're very happy that he's finally exempted. It was a long time. He was first imprisoned in August 2024.
Okay.
And we're now in March, and just now he got his exemption. He was in prison many times. He's the refuser that sat the most time in prison for over a decade. And we're really seeing this shift in the military's policies that started with Tal and has continued on since, and this big uncertainty factor. And it's interesting also to talk about Itamar. He was covered in some media. I don't think he was covered enough considering his story.
Very long time to be in.
A very long time to be imprisoned, and very long imprisonments.
What does that tell you? Do you think they're afraid they'll be more like you?
I think it's a way to show what happens to someone who criticizes, what happens to someone who refuses. I think like it's a way to scare people. Like, you're thinking of refusal or thinking of criticizing, look at Itamar Genbek. He sat 197 days. Do you want to sit 197 days in military prison? That's definitely a way to also, Tal was a way for the military to show an example. And Itamar has a really, really interesting story. He comes from an ultra-Orthodox family. During high school, he stepped out of the religion. He's not ultra-Orthodox anymore. He found, he started to find his way to the radical left, and he decided that he is going to refuse. And he has a very, very special story. His dad serves in the military.
Wow. That's very hard.
Yeah, he's a general in the military, and he is in contact with it. He lives with his family, and so it's a very, very special story. And I think Itamar is very brave for that, for speaking up, and for persisting with his refusal through another imprisonment, and with this huge uncertainty of when they're going to release him. He is very, very brave for that.
There was a report that came out today from the United Nations about Israel's use of systemic sexual violence on Palestinians. And I'm just trying to get a sense of if you guys could describe for us what Israeli society is like today, because I don't think that we have a clear understanding. I mean, we've seen people protesting for the right to be able to rape prisoners, Palestinian abductees. So, what? Give us a sense of what Israeli society is like.
I saw the post about it on Israeli media, on Instagram, and in the comments, the top liked comments were people obviously denying it, but not denying it out of our soldiers are the most moral. It was comments. It makes me sick if you to repeat it, but they're comments saying how the soldiers. I don't know if I can even say it. Like,
you can say whatever you like here.
How the soldiers our soldiers would never touch those disgusting women.
I see.
And like all the dozens of comments that are like that.
They just like to wear their lingerie.
Exactly. It makes me sick, and like before I said, a large part of society supports a ceasefire deal and a hostage deal. That does not mean a large part of society supports any kind of Palestinian human rights. When they poll the Israeli society about the Trump transfer plan, we see a large majority in favor of the Trump transfer plan.
You know, you're the youngest people I've interviewed over the past 16 months, and I'm just wondering, what is it that you think needs to happen? And I know this is a big question for both of you, but what will it take to make other Israelis understand that they are complicit when they go and they carry a gun and they serve? What do you think it's going to take?
I think that having those cracks in the dehumanization of the Palestinian people is the key. Because once you have a face and a story and a name to things, and once you have a personal connection, then it affects you. I think it can change, and I think I'm more optimistic than Tal. But I think that having this, like, and we live in such a separated society, and there's the walls and everything is very, very, very separated, and there's these highways in the West Bank that Israelis can go through so they don't have to pass through Palestinian villages. It's getting developed all the time, these methods of separation.
Sterile roads.
And having those stories, and I think No Other Land is a very...
It's the film that won the Oscar.
No Other Land is the film that won the Oscar for the best documentary recently, and an amazing film.
Where we can't watch it anywhere.
There are some screenings in some of the cities over Canada.
Well, here, but they don't have a U.S. distributor. Nobody, and I'm not sure if you heard the news today that this cinema showed it in Miami, and now they want to take the lease away from the
Yeah.
theater
Oh, wow, I
company.
didn't. Wow. But I think that like a movie like that is a gate to things changing. I think that when you watch that movie and you see the stories, you feel the stories of families in Musafiriyata going through displacement, forced displacement, and the ethnic cleansing, and settler raids and violent interactions with the military that arrest them for nothing. And I think seeing homes being demolished, schools being demolished.
Do you see
and-
that? Is that shown on TV there?
Oh, it's not shown on TV. There
Yeah.
are some activist spaces that initiated screenings. But I think that is a very, very strong tool, and I'm very excited for Bassel and Yuval and Rachel and Hamdan that they won the Oscars for this, and I wish that as many people watch this film because I think that's a gate for humanization of the people. And I think there is a reason that we're not going to see it distributed in Israeli cinemas because it's such a it's a film that puts the humans in the center, and that is the scariest, most most threatening thing on the apartheid regime.
How about for you? What do you think it's going to take? She said she's more optimistic than you.
Yes, I've been thinking about it while she talked, and I don't think that there will be a point that will happen that Israeli citizens will some like in one moment realize, oh, the Palestinians deserve human rights. We're not the first society to be a fascist colonial society, and we're not the last one, probably. For example, like this. South African apartheid did not fall because white South Africans realized that black South Africans should have human rights, and the war in Vietnam did not end because Americans realized the atrocities that they're committing on the Vietnamese. It ended because the occupying, the strong society realized that it's not practical anymore to maintain the occupation and to maintain the genocide. And that's what I think will happen. I mean, hopefully. If something happens, it will come from international pressure and internal pressure on Israelis to realize because of what Israelis have done and because of what Israel has done to the Palestinians, to make the lives of Israelis that have been very comfortable until now, make it so ex-Israeli soldiers are not comfortable going around in Europe without having an arrest warrant out for them, making it so Israel cannot compete in the Eurovision or in other types of competitions. Make it so Israelis feel what it means to be a society that
A pariah. Make you feel. Yeah.
And from a practical standpoint, that might lead to some people saying, listen, I would rather have peace with UAE. I would rather be able to travel in Europe. I would rather be able to trade with international countries and have a Palestinian state, Palestinian independence, than the other way. And I'm not saying I believe that's going to happen. I just think that that's a more likely scenario than what Einat, but it's okay. We can have our disagreements.
And so what's next? Where are you going after this, like in Canada?
We're continuing to Hamilton and Guelph and London, Winnipeg, Vancouver, all over the state.
You are going to Vancouver, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And then after that, we're going to go back to our homes. And a week later, I'm going to move to Musafiriyata to start an Arabic course while doing protective presence in the Palestinian community.
So you're going to the community that was featured in that film,
Yes.
No Other Land.
Yes.
Yeah. And what's next for you?
Going back to my day-to-day, protests.
Shit
supporting
disturbing
the
you, shit
refusers
disturber.
and,
Stuff
that
that
kind
we
of
maybe
stuff.
shouldn't say on TV.
She's a troublemaker. Thank you so much for speaking
Thank
with
you
me.
for having
Thank
us.
you.